I'll erase your past. Mafia boss promised, if you trust me enough to marry me tonight. The smell of stale coffee and burnt bacon grease clung to her clothes, a cheap perfume she could never wash out. Isla Merrick, known to the sparse population of Elmbrook as Ava Moore, pushed the diner's back door open with her hip, the rusty hinge groaning into the damp night air. She pulled the hood of her worn gray sweatshirt up, a nightly ritual. Her walk home was a precise, calculated route designed by a mind that lived in fear. She never took the main street, never walked under the bright, buzzing lampposts. She moved through the alley that separated the diner from the laundromat, her sneakers silent on the cracked pavement. She cut behind the closed seafood market, the air thick with the smell of old fish and salt. She avoided cameras. She avoided crowds. For 2 years, she'd been a ghost, a pale imitation of a person, and that was the only way she had stayed alive. The Seabreeze Motel was a lie. It was 3 miles inland, and the only breeze came from the exhaust of the highway 100 yards away. It was a place for people with no other place to go, which made it the perfect place for her. Her room, number 107, was at the back, near the humming ice machine. She fumbled for her keys, her fingers numb from the coastal chill. When she saw it, a piece of white paper, a simple envelope, had slipped under her door. Not taped to it, slipped under. Someone had been here. Her breath hitched. She scanned the dark parking lot. The only movement was a plastic bag tumbling across the asphalt. Slowly, she knelt. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. It was heavy. Expensive feeling paper. She turned it over. No name. She unlocked her door, shoulder-checking it open, and locked the deadbolt and chain behind her before she dared to open it. Inside the envelope was a single, folded card. She unfolded it. There was only one word, printed in a clean, sharp font, Isla. Her blood turned to ice. It was a name she had not heard spoken, not seen written, in 24 months. It was the name of a dead person. Her name. The room, with its stained carpet and flickering fluorescent light in the tiny bathroom, began to spin. She wasn't at the Seabreeze. She was in Chicago. She was on the cold tile of a kitchen floor, the smell of gun oil and stale beer filling her nostrils. She could feel the heavy, possessive weight of his hand on her throat, the shine of his badge reflecting the overhead light as he leaned over her. Officer Troy Beckett, her fiancé, her keeper, her abuser. He had loved her, he said, but his love was a cage. He loved the way she looked, so he made her quit her job. He loved the way she depended on him, so he cut off her friends. He loved her, so he corrected her, first with words that sliced, then with a grip that bruised, and finally, with a cold, terrifying control. The last night, the night she ran, had been over a burned dinner. He had calmly explained, while polishing his off-duty firearm at the kitchen table, how she was worthless, how she couldn't even do the one simple thing he asked when she had tried to leave, to just get air. He had shown her what happened when she disobeyed. He hadn't just hit her. He had unholstered his weapon, the click of the safety echoing in the small apartment, and pressed the cold steel to her temple, not to shoot her, just to show her he could, just to show her that he owned her, body and soul, life and death. She had escaped 2 days later with $200, a bus ticket and a new name she'd stolen from a gravestone, Ava Moore. Now, that single word on a piece of paper told her the ghost she had been running from had found her. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. She sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress until the sun rose. Then she showered, changed into her spare, identical uniform, and walked back to the diner. Fear was a luxury. She had to pay rent. The next night, the bell over the diner door chimed at 8 o'clock, and 2 men walked in. They were not from Elmbrook. They wore cheap, ill-fitting suits and had the kind of broken-nosed arrogance that signaled trouble. They slid into the stools at her counter, their eyes scanning the room before landing on her. "Ava Moore," the larger one said. It wasn't a question. "Can I get you something?" Isla asked, her voice quiet, her hands hidden beneath the counter. "Yeah, you can." The second one, leaner and meaner, chimed in. "A friend of ours says you owe him, says you skipped town on a debt, a big one." Isla's mind raced. A debt? She owed nothing. She paid for her room in cash every week. This was wrong. This was a shakedown. Was this Troy? Had he sent them? I think you have the wrong person, she said, her throat tight. The large one laughed, a wet, ugly sound. She says we have the wrong person. That's funny, because our friend was very specific. Ava Moore. I'm from Chicago. Ran up a tab and left her man to pay for it. Her blood ran cold. Her man. This was him. Troy had sent them. Look. Her boss, Mel, called out from the grill, spatula in hand. We don't want any trouble here, fellas. Then stay out of it, old man. The lean one snapped. He reached across the counter and, before Isla could flinch, his hand clamped around her wrist. It was a grip she knew, a grip of ownership. You're coming with us. We're going to settle this. Let me go, she whispered, tugging, but her pull was weak, useless. Panic was rising, hot and acidic, in her throat. The bell over the door chimed again. Neither Isla nor the two men paid it any mind, but the new arrival changed the atmosphere in the room instantly. The buzzing fluorescent lights seemed to dim, the sound of the sizzling grill muted. He was sitting in the corner booth, a place that had been empty seconds before, or maybe he had walked there. Isla hadn't seen him move. He wasn't like the other two. His suit was dark, tailored, and moved with him like a second skin. He was sharply dressed, his dark hair cut with precision. He was in town on private business, and his presence made the diner feel small. He was looking at the menu, but he wasn't reading it. I said, she's coming with us, the goon repeated, yanking her wrist. Let her go. The voice was not loud. It was a low, smooth baritone, thick with an authority that didn't need to shout. It came from the man in the booth. He hadn't even looked up from the menu. The lean goon turned. Who the hell are you? Mind your own business. The man in the booth slowly, very slowly, closed the menu and placed it on the table. He looked up, and for the first time, Isla saw his eyes. They were dark, assessing, and utterly cold. He was brooding, a storm cloud in a cheap suit, and he was looking at the hand on Isla's wrist. You have 3 seconds, the man said, his voice calm, to take your hand off her, or I am going to break every finger on it. Then, I will break the other one, just to make me repeat myself. There was no bluster. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the casual certainty of a man ordering coffee. The goon, to his credit, was stupid enough to posture. Yeah? You in what army? The man smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. I don't need one. The goon released her, not out of fear, but to turn and face the threat. This ain't your concern, pal. It is now. The man stood. He was tall, broader than he had looked sitting down. He walked toward the counter, not with aggression, but with a fluid, predatory grace. He stopped beside Isla. Nico Romano. The name would come later, but in that moment, he was just power. He looked at the two men. You're from the city. You know who runs the docks. You know who you answer to. And you know you are not allowed to operate here, not without permission. The two men's faces went pale. They recognized the language. They recognized the threat. This wasn't a random civilian. This was a different kind of animal. We were just collecting, the large one stammered. You're done, Nico said. He gestured to the door. Leave, and tell whoever sent you that Elmbrook is off limits. If I see you here again, you won't be leaving. The two men, suddenly small, scrambled for the door and disappeared into the night. The bell chimed, signaling their retreat. The silence they left behind was heavy. Isla was breathing hard, her wrist throbbing. Mel was frozen by the grill. Nico turned to Mel. He pulled a thick money clip from his pocket, peeled off several $100 bills, and dropped them on the counter. For the trouble, and for her. He gestured at Isla. Give her the night off, and the week. Paid. Mel just nodded, snatching the money. Nico looked at Isla. You should go home. The adrenaline, which had frozen her, now turned to a fierce, prideful anger. He had saved her. Yes, but he had also marked her. He had thrown money at her boss like she was a piece of property. He was just like Troy, only quieter. I don't want your money, she said, her voice shaking but firm. She grabbed her jacket from the hook. And I don't need your help. She pushed past him and burst out the front door. into the cold air. She didn't run. She walked. Fast. Her head down. She heard the diner door open behind her. She heard his footsteps. They were measured, unhurried. He wasn't chasing her. He was simply following. "Leave me alone," she yelled, without looking back. "I'm just making sure you get home," his voice replied, closer than she expected. She plunged into the alleyways, her familiar, dark route. She was faster here. She knew the turns, the broken pavement. She ran the last block to the motel, her lungs burning. She fumbled with her keys at room 107, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't get the key in the lock. "You're not safe here." She spun around. He was there, standing at the end of the walkway by the rusted soda machine, bathed in the flickering green light. He hadn't followed her into the alleys. He had driven. A sleek, black sedan was parked silently in the shadows, a car she hadn't even noticed. He knew where she was going. "I'm not safe anywhere," she screamed, the words tearing from her throat, the terror of the past 48 hours, the note, the goons, the 2 years of hiding. It all came crashing down. The facade of Ava Moore shattered, leaving only Isla Merrick, terrified and cornered. "He found me," she sobbed, sliding down the rough wood door of her room, burying her face in her hands. "After all this time, he found me. He's going to kill me." The dam broke. The tears came, hot and bitter, the kind of sobs that ripped from the diaphragm, raw and animalistic. She hadn't cried in 2 years. He walked toward her, his expensive shoes silent on the concrete. He stopped, not towering over her, but a respectful few feet away. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't try to touch her. He just waited. When her sobs quieted to ragged, hitching breaths, he spoke. His voice was low. "Who found you?" "My ex," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "A cop, a dirty cop. He'll kill me. He promised he would if I ever left." Nico was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes scanning the bleak motel courtyard. He seemed to be weighing a decision. "He won't," Nico said finally. Isla looked up, her face streaked with tears and grime. "How do you know? You don't know him." "No," Nico agreed, "but he doesn't know me." He crouched, bringing himself down to her level. The posture was disarming, but the intensity in his gaze was anything but. "I can make him disappear." "What?" "The cop. Your ex. I can make him go away. Not just from here. From everywhere. I can make it so he can't find you." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "I can make Isla Merrick disappear. Permanently. I can give you a new life. A real one. No more running." She stared at him, confused. "Wary? What do you want?" "I have nothing. I have no money. I don't want your money, he said. "I want something more. I'm offering you a way out, but you have to do something for me in return." "What? What do you want?" "I need you to trust me. I need you to agree to a proposal, one you don't understand yet." The air between them was electric, a strange, terrifying connection forged in the flickering neon light. Here was another man offering a cage, but this one felt different, colder, larger, but different. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raw. "You don't even know me. You just saw me in a diner." "Why me?" The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest he had come to an expression. He reached out, not to touch her face, but to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers barely brushed her skin, but a jolt went through her, sharp and sudden. "Because I've seen real fear," he said softly, his voice a rumble that seemed to vibrate in her chest. "The kind that lives in your bones, the kind that makes you look over your shoulder even when you're alone, and you carry it every day. I'm offering you a way to put it down." He saw her, not Ava, the clumsy waitress. He saw Isla, the survivor, and he wasn't repulsed. He was interested. He stood up, offering his hand. "You can't stay here tonight, that note. Those men, it's compromised." She looked at his hand. It was large, clean, the nails perfectly manicured. It was the hand of a man who had never scrubbed a grill or worried about rent. It was the hand of a man who broke fingers. She hesitated for a beat, then 2. Then she placed her shaking, grimy hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and sure. He pulled her to her feet easily. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. "Somewhere safe," he said. The black sedan glided to the curb, a driver she hadn't seen before at the wheel. Nico opened the back door for her. She slid in. The leather was soft, smelling of wealth and safety. He got in beside her. The car pulled away from the Seabreeze Motel, leaving her old, hollow life behind. They drove for an hour, out of Elmbrook, away from the coast, and deep into the heart of the city, a place she had avoided. The car stopped at a tall, glass and steel tower that pierced the night sky. A private elevator took them straight to the top. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into a penthouse. It was a palace of glass and shadows. The city lights spread out below them like a carpet of diamonds. It was the quietest, most expensive room she had ever been in. "This is my private residence," he said. "No one knows this address, not even my driver." He gestured to a hallway. "The guest room is down there. There's a bathroom, a shower, clothes. You'll be safe here." She stood in the middle of the vast living room, clutching her thin jacket, a piece of trash in a museum. "My proposal," he said, "can wait until morning." She nodded, unable to speak. The chemistry between them was a thick, heavy thing simmering under the surface. It wasn't just fear. It wasn't gratitude. It was a terrifying, magnetic pull, a recognition of the darkness in each of them. He watched her, his expression unreadable. He made no move toward her. He didn't touch her. He didn't crowd her. He just gave her space. "Sleep, Isla," he said, using her real name again. It sounded different in his mouth. Not a threat, a fact. She walked to the guest room and, for the first time in 2 years, she locked a door and believed it might actually hold. Isla woke to silence. It was the silence that struck her first. Not the rumble of the highway or the slamming of doors at the Seabreeze. This was a deep, insulated quiet, the kind that only very much money could buy. She was in the guest room, in a bed large enough for 4 people, under sheets that felt like cool water. Sunlight streamed through a gap in the heavy curtains, cutting a sharp, bright line across the plush carpet. For a moment, she had forgotten. For one sweet, stupid moment, she had felt safe. Then the night came rushing back. The men at the diner, the dark, cold eyes of the man who had rescued her, the penthouse. She showered in a bathroom carved from gray marble, the water pressure strong enough to bruise. There were no clothes from her old life, only the ones she had worn from the diner, which were now piled in a corner like a shed skin. On the bed, someone, him, it had to be him, had laid out a simple set of clothes, black knit trousers and a cream-colored cashmere sweater. They were soft, anonymous, and fit her with a precision that was unsettling. She found him in the vast open-plan kitchen, standing by a wall of glass that overlooked the entire city. He was already dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked like he owned the view. He probably did. "There is coffee," he said. Not turning, he gestured to a high-tech machine on the marble island. "And food, if you want it." Isla ignored both. She stood stiffly in the archway, her stockinged feet cold on the polished stone floor. "You said you had a proposal." Nico turned, setting his cup down. He regarded her for a long moment, his gaze taking in the borrowed clothes, the damp hair, the defiant, terrified set of her jaw. "I do," he said. He picked up a slim, dark blue file from the counter and placed it in front of her. She didn't move toward it. "What is it?" "It is a new life," he said. "A real one. Not the imitation you were living in Elmbrook." Her curiosity, a fragile, dangerous thing, pulled her forward. She stepped up to the island and opened the folder. Inside, on top, was a driver's license. The woman looked like her, but she was smiling. The eyes were clear. The name read, Elena Bianchi. Under it was a Social Security card and a birth certificate, both bearing the same name. "Who is Elena Bianchi?" she whispered. "She's a woman with a clean past," Nico said. "No connections to Chicago, no debts, no abusive ex-boyfriends. She has a trust fund, a passport. She is, for all intents and purposes, a brand new person. She can be you." Isla stared at the documents. It was magic, a dark, terrifying magic. To be erased so completely, to be reborn. It was everything she had dreamed of for 2 years. "What's the cost?" she asked, her voice flat. "My proposal. The one from last night." He leaned against the counter, his proximity making the huge kitchen feel small. "I need you to marry me." The words hung in the sterile air, cold and sharp as the glass around them. Isla recoiled, a bitter laugh bubbling in her throat. "Marry you? I don't even know you. You're a criminal. Those men, they knew you." "I am a businessman," Nico corrected her, his voice smooth. "And those men knew their place, which is why you are safe." "This is insane." She backed away from the island, away from the folder. "You saved me from a couple of thugs just to what? Buy me? This is not a purchase. It is a transaction," he said calmly, his patience unnerving. "You are in danger. I am offering you an exit, the only exit." "Why?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Why me? You could have any woman you want. Why do you need to marry a broke, terrified waitress from a motel?" "Because you are exactly that," he said, and the coldness in his eyes was absolute. "You are broke. You are terrified. You have no one. You are the perfect candidate. You won't be missed." Isla flinched, the truth of his words a physical blow. "I am in the final stages of a merger," he continued, his tone all business. "A legitimate merger. The families I am dealing with are old world. They value tradition, stability. They do not trust a man they cannot understand. They see me, and they see my father." He walked to the window, his back to her. "My father's name was built on blood and violence. I am trying to build something that lasts, something clean. To do that, I need to look legitimate. I need a wife, a respectable, quiet wife." "A prop," Isla spat. "You need a prop to stand on a stage and make you look like a family man." "I need a wife," he repeated, turning back to her. "And you, Isla, need a ghost. I'm offering you a trade, my name, my protection, in exchange for your signature on a piece of paper." She stared at him, seeing the trap clearly. It was another cage, a bigger, prettier, colder cage than the one Troy had built, but a cage all the same. She had spent 2 years running from one monster, and here she was, being offered a life contract with another. "No," she said. No, I won't. I am not for sale. I am not a prop, and I will not trade one prison for another." Her pride, the only thing she had left, flared hot and bright. "I'll take my chances. He can't keep me." "He's a cop," Nico said flatly. "He has a badge and a gun. He has the entire system on his side. You have a diner uniform and a motel key. You are not taking your chances. You are walking to your grave." "Go to hell!" She turned and marched toward the elevator, her body vibrating with a furious, terrified energy. She jabbed the button. "The file on Elena Bianchi will be here when you get back," he called out. "I'm not coming back," she shouted, as the elevator doors slid open. "I will not chase you. Isla." His voice followed her into the mirrored box, calm and sure. "But you cannot go back there. It is no longer safe." The doors slid shut, and she was alone, plunging silently down through the heart of the glass tower. She burst out into the morning lobby, a place of silent, efficient doormen and polished marble floors. They looked at her, this disheveled woman in mismatched, expensive clothes, but no one stopped her. She hit the street and hailed a cab, her mind a riot of anger and fear. She didn't have money for the fare. She didn't care. She would run. The drive back to Elmbrook was a slow-motion nightmare. Every car behind them was Troy. Every siren was for her. When they pulled up to the cracked pavement of the Seabreeze Motel, she threw the door open. "Hey, lady, the fare!" the driver yelled. She ran. She didn't have time. She ran toward room 107. Nico had been wrong. She had to go back. She had $200. Her emergency money, taped inside a slit in the cheap mattress. It was her last escape, but she stopped 20 feet from her door. It was open, not unlocked. It was open, hanging by a single, splintered hinge, looking like it had been kicked in. "No," she whispered. Her legs went weak. She crept forward, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She peeked inside. It was not just tossed, it was destroyed, violated. The room had been small, but the wreckage was total. The single chair was in pieces. The thin curtains were ripped from the wall. Her cheap clothes, the 2 spare uniforms she rotated, had been pulled from the dresser and sliced to ribbons, scattered across the floor. But it was the mattress that made her stomach heave. It had been slashed, the yellow foam guts pulled out. Her money was gone. This wasn't a robbery, and this was a message. This was personal. This was him, the memory, hot and vivid, slammed into her. Troy, his face purple with rage, his hand gripping her hair, pulling her head back. It was the night she'd tried to leave him the first time. He hadn't just hit her. He had systematically destroyed her things. He had shattered her grandmother's porcelain teacup, the only thing she had left of her, making her watch as he ground the pieces under his boot. He'd taken her car keys and her phone. He'd framed her for shoplifting at her old job, just to get her fired. "You have nothing," he had whispered in her ear, his breath hot and smelling of whiskey, as he pinned her to the wall. "You have no one. You are mine. And if you ever try to leave me again, I will not just ruin you, I will erase you." She had barely escaped alive, slipping out when he was on a 24-hour shift, running to a bus station with nothing but the cash in her pocket and a terror so deep it stole her breath. And now, standing in the ruined doorway of her fake life, she knew he had found her. This was his signature. This was his promise. Nico was right. She wasn't walking to her grave. She was running. She stumbled backward, bile rising in her throat. She ran. She ran from the motel, from Elmbrook, from the ghost of Ava Moore. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs cramped. She made it to the bus stop and begged, her voice raw and her eyes wild, until a woman gave her enough cash for a one-way ticket back to the city. The ride was a blur. She arrived at the glass tower, a creature of grime and tears, her borrowed cashmere sweater stained with sweat. The doorman, the same one from hours before, saw her coming and stepped forward, his hand raised. "Ma'am, you cannot be here." "She's with me," Nico's voice. He was there, standing in the lobby, as if he had never moved, as if he had been waiting. The sight of him, his calm, his control, his absolute, infuriating rightness, broke the last thread of her composure. She collapsed. He was there before she hit the marble floor, his arms, strong and sure, wrapped around her, pulling her against the solid wall of his chest. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just held her, one hand moving to the back of her head, holding her as she sobbed into his expensive shirt, the smell of clean cotton and power filling her senses. "He was there!" she cried, her words muffled. "He found me. He destroyed everything. He's going to kill me." "No, he's not," Nico said. His voice was different now. Not cold. It was a low, dangerous rumble. He held her for a moment longer, then gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I won't let him." He held her gaze, and she saw something flicker in the darkness. Not just cold calculation. Possession. "Marry me," he whispered, his voice a raw command, brushing the hair from her damp forehead. "Tonight. Right now. And I will make him disappear from every system. I will burn his career to the ground. I will make him a ghost. I will erase the name Troy Beckett." She was too tired to run, too broken to fight. She was trading one cage for another. But this cage, this man, was offering her the one thing she cared more than freedom: revenge, safety. She gave a single, convulsive nod against his chest. The shift was immediate. Nico became a man of pure, cold efficiency. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the elevator, ignoring the stunned doorman. Back in the penthouse, he set her on her feet. "Go," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Clean up. There is a dress on the bed in my room. Put it on. My men are on their way." He was already on the phone, his back to her, his voice low, rapid, and brutal. "We're doing it tonight. Get the judge. And I want the team on Beckett. Full trace. I want to know when he breathes." Isla was numb. She walked into his bedroom, a vast space of dark woods and gray linens. On the king-sized bed, a dress was laid out. It was not a white gown, but a simple, elegant sheath of deep, midnight blue silk. She touched it. It was soft, expensive. She showered, washing away the grime of the Seabreeze Motel, washing away Ava Moore. When she stepped out, she put on the dress. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. When she walked back into the living room, the sun had set. The penthouse was lit only by the thousands of city lights below. The room had changed. It was no longer empty. 3 men stood by the window, all dressed in dark, impeccable suits. They were Nico's lieutenants, their faces hard, their eyes watchful. A 4th, older man stood by the fireplace, holding a small, leather-bound book. The judge. Nico was there, waiting for her. He had changed into a dark suit. He looked at her, and his eyes. They burned. He held out his hand. She walked to him, her legs unsteady, the silk of the dress whispering around her ankles. She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, strong. The ceremony was held right there, on the private terrace, high above the world. It was quiet. Candlelight flickered on a small table. There was no music, only the distant sound of the city and the low, droning voice of the judge. When it was her turn to speak, her voice shook. Elena. Nico's grip tightened. Isla, he said to the judge, a quiet order. The judge nodded, not missing a beat. Isla, take you. Nico, she whispered, the words tasting strange. She was signing her life away, again. When the judge finished, he said, "You may kiss the bride." Nico didn't move. He stood, watching her, his dark eyes searching her face. He was not a man who would take. He was giving her a choice, the last choice. Her heart was hammering. This was her new master. This was her savior. She was terrified. But as she looked at him, she saw the promise he had made. I will erase him. Slowly, her eyes locked on his. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't smile. He simply stepped closer, one hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, a surprisingly gentle touch. He leaned in, and his mouth met hers. The kiss was not what she expected. It was not the brutal, possessive kiss of Troy. It was slow, it was warm, it was tender. It was a kiss of sealing, a brand of ownership, yes, but one that promised sanctuary, not pain. It deepened for a moment, an exploration, a taste before he pulled back, his eyes never leaving hers. The judge and the lieutenants were gone. They had melted away as silently as they had arrived. They were alone on the rooftop. His wife, the passion, the unspoken, heavy thing that had been simmering between them since the diner, finally broke through the surface. The air was charged, thick with her fear and his control. She was the one who moved first. Her hand, the one that still bore the faint, phantom ache of the goon's grip, lifted to his face. She touched his cheek, tracing the hard line of his jaw. He was real. This was real. "I don't know how to be someone's wife," she whispered, the confession torn from the deepest part of her. She only knew how to be a victim. Nico turned his head, kissing her palm, his eyes dark and heavy-lidded. "Then be mine," he answered, his voice a low growl. "Just mine." He didn't pull her into his arms. He waited, and in that, he gave her everything. She stepped into him, her hands moving from his face to his shirt, gripping the fine cotton. He led her inside, away from the cold night, into the warm shadows of his bedroom. He turned her to face him, his hands finding the zipper on the back of her dress. He lowered it slowly, his knuckles brushing her spine. The silk pooled at her feet. She stood before him, her body tense, braced for what came next. She was a map of old scars, a landscape of fear. Nico's hands, the same hands she knew could break bones, were impossibly careful. He didn't grab her. He traced the line of her collarbone, his touch, light, respectful. He kissed her shoulder, a soft, warm pressure that made her shiver. Her tension, the rigid fear that had been her armor for 2 years, began to soften. She saw the wanting in his eyes, but it was banked, controlled, held back by a fierce, iron will. He was giving the power to her. She reached up, her own fingers trembling, and began to unbutton his shirt. His hands covered hers, stilling them, before he took over. Shrugging off his suit jacket, pulling his shirt from his trousers, he lifted her, his hands strong and sure at her waist, and laid her on the cool, soft sheets. He looked at her, a long, deep look of possession, and as he came down to her, his mouth finding hers again, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt, for the first time, like she had been found, for the first time in 841 days. Isla woke up warm. It was not the thin, hollow warmth of a worn-out blanket, but a deep, foundational heat. She was on her side, and a heavy arm was draped over her waist. A solid, living body was pressed against her back. The air she breathed smelled of him, a clean, sharp scent of expensive soap and something uniquely male. She opened her eyes. The room was cast in the soft, gray light of dawn. His bedroom, his bed, his arm. Panic should have been her first response. Her body was wired for it. Waking up trapped by a man was the stuff of her nightmares. But as she lay there, still and silent, she waited for the familiar spike of adrenaline, the cold rush of fear. It did not come. In its place was a profound, unsettling peace. Her muscles, which had been coiled tight for 2 years, were lax. The constant, high-pitched ringing of anxiety in her ears was silent. She was confused by the absence of fear. Nico was asleep. His breathing was deep and even. His face turned toward her, relaxed in a way she had not seen. In sleep, the iron control was gone. He looked younger, almost vulnerable. The sight made her chest ache with an emotion she could not name. She had married a stranger, a dangerous man who had bought her with a promise of safety. Last night, he'd been careful, tender, and had treated her body with a reverence that had undone her. He had taken nothing, but had simply offered, waited, and accepted what she gave. And she, Isla, who had flinched from a cashier's brush of fingers, had initiated. She had touched him. She had let him see her. She carefully, slowly, extricated herself from his hold. He murmured in his sleep, his arm tightening for a moment before relaxing. She slid from the bed and found one of his shirts, a crisp, white cotton one, on the floor. She pulled it on, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the hem hitting her mid-thigh. It smelled of him. She felt ridiculously like she was wearing armor. He was awake when she came back from the guest bathroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to her. He was already on the phone, his voice a low, commanding rumble. He was wearing dark gray suit pants, his chest and back bare. She saw, for the first time in daylight, the map of his skin. A long, thin scar, silvery white, cut a line from his shoulder blade down his ribs. He had not gotten that scar in the boardroom. He ended the call and stood, turning to face her. His eyes were sharp again, the control back in place. His gaze swept over her, taking in his shirt on her small frame. A flicker of something, possession, approval, warmed his expression. "Good morning, Isla," he said. "Isla Romano," she said, the name feeling foreign, heavy. "Or is it Elena Bianchi?" "That is your new legal identity," he said, walking to his closet. "A ghost for the public, but you are Isla, my wife. You are Isla Romano." He pulled out a fresh shirt. "We have much to do today." A few hours later, a woman arrived. She was sharp, in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled into a severe chignon and a pencil skirt that meant business. She moved with a quick, silent efficiency. "Isla, this is Camilla," Nico said, standing by the window. "She is my executive assistant. She handles my life. From now on, she also handles yours. You will trust her implicitly." Camilla did not smile. She extended a crisp, cool hand. "Mrs. Romano, a pleasure." Her eyes were intelligent, assessing, and held no judgment. For the next 4 hours, Camilla rebuilt Isla's life. It was a dizzying, terrifying process. "These are your new documents," Camilla said, and pushing a slim, leather-bound folder across the glass dining table. "The Elena Bianchi passport, the driver's license. The originals are in a vault. These are for your use. Memorize the details, the birth date, the social security number. Your past is now in Florence, Italy, Until the age of 16. My past, Isla repeated numbly. Yes, a fabricated, airtight history. Camilla tapped her tablet. Your bank accounts have been established. You have a personal, non-traceable credit card with an unlimited line. She slid the heavy, black piece of metal across the table. I have also arranged for a wardrobe. Your sizes were on file. How? Isla asked, alarmed. From the dress last night, Camilla said, without looking up. The penthouse is now your primary residence. It is secure. However, you will not be leaving it alone. What do you mean? Mister, Romano has assigned you a security detail. Luca. He will be with you whenever you are outside these walls. He's parked in the lobby. You will not see him, but he will see you. This is not negotiable. Luxury. Danger. A bodyguard. Isla looked at the black credit card. 2 days ago. She'd been counting tips, terrified she would be short for her motel room. Now, she had an unlimited line of credit and a shadow. She was learning the language of Nico's world. It was a world of quiet loyalty and unspoken threats. The doormen no longer looked at her. They looked down, murmuring, Mrs. Romano. Doors were held, elevators were waiting. The entire city seemed to bend around her husband's will, and she was now part of that will. That night, Nico told her they had dinner. A family dinner, he'd called it. It was not a family. They were in a private, wood-paneled room in the back of an old, red-sauce Italian restaurant. The air was thick with the smell of garlic, wine, and old secrets. Seated around the long table were 5 of Nico's inner circle. His capos. They were older men, with faces like maps of hard decisions, their suits expensive, their loyalty to Nico absolute, but old world. They stood when Nico and Isla entered. Isla, in a simple, elegant black dress Camilla had provided, felt like an animal in a zoo. Their eyes were on her, not with lust, but with calculation. She was the new variable, the unknown. Nico's hand was a heavy, warm weight on the small of her back. This is my wife, Isla, he said, his voice leaving no room for questions. She was seated at his right hand. The dinner was loud, full of laughter and backslapping, but Isla felt the tension under it. These men were testing him, his new, legitimate life, his new, unknown wife. One capo, a man with a thick neck and small, wet eyes named Ricardo, had been drinking heavily. He hadn't taken his eyes off Isla all night. So, Nico, Ricardo said, his voice a gravelly slur as he raised his wine glass. You are cleaning up the family name. We see this, the merger. Very good. Very modern. He took a long, slow drink, his eyes on Isla. And you have cleaned up your own life. Heard you picked this one up from the gutter. A waitress. Cleaning her up is very nice. The room went dead silent. The clink of forks stopped. Isla's blood froze. She felt the insult like a slap. Beside her. Nico did not move. He did not turn. But she felt the change. The warmth from his body vanished. A chill, a pure, Arctic cold, radiated from him. He slowly placed his fork on his plate, the tink of metal on porcelain the only sound. He was looking at Ricardo, and his eyes, the dark, assessing eyes she knew, were gone. In their place was a flat, dead emptiness that was terrifying. He was going to kill him, not here, not now, but the decision had been made. His hand, resting on the table, had slowly curled into a fist. Isla's heart hammered. This was her fault, her past, her gutter life, was shaming him. This was her, bringing violence to his table. Ricardo, sensing his mistake, but too drunk to back down, tried to laugh. It's a compliment, boss. She's a... Before Nico could move, before he could speak the words that would condemn the man, Isla acted. She reached under the table. Her hand, small and steady, covered his fist. She didn't squeeze. She just rested there. A silent, firm pressure. Stop. Nico's fist was stone. He didn't flinch, didn't look at her. Isla turned her head, her gaze calm, and looked directly at Ricardo. Her heart was a trapped bird against her ribs, but she held his stare. I'm sorry, she said, her voice clear, ringing in the silence. We haven't been properly introduced. I'm Isla Romano. And you are? The power in the room shifted. It tilted, sharp and sudden. She had not cried. She had not looked to her husband for protection. She had faced the threat and claimed her new name. Ricardo's face went pale, then a dark, mottled red. He stammered, Ricardo Gallo. A pleasure, Ricardo, Hila said, her voice like ice. She then turned back to her plate, picked up her fork, and took a small, deliberate bite of pasta. The dinner was over. The ride home was silent. Hila sat as far from Nico as she could in the back of the sedan, her hands clasped in her lap to stop their shaking. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving her cold and trembling, the tremors starting in her knees and moving up her body. Nico said nothing. He stared out the window, his jaw a hard, angry line, when they were back in the penthouse, the elevator doors sliding shut behind them. He finally spoke. He will not be a problem again. Are you going to hurt him? She asked, her voice small. He disrespected my wife. He disrespected me, Nico stated, as if it were a law of physics. Don't, she said, turning to him. The trembling was in her voice now. Don't. Not for me. It's true. Everything he said. I was a waitress. I was from the gutter. You are my wife, he said, his voice low and dangerous. And I just brought shame to your table, she cried, the fear and humiliation finally breaking through. Don't you see? I'm just like him. Troy. I bring this. I bring the violence. You do not. He stepped toward her, and she flinched. A small, instinctive movement she hated. Nico froze, his face, which had been hard with anger, shattered. The rage was gone, replaced by an aching, raw pain that mirrored her own. He made you do that, he whispered, to flinch from me. I'm sorry, she stammered. No, he said, his voice rough. He guided her to the sofa, sitting beside her, but not touching. He took her shaking hands in his. You were strong tonight. Hila. Stronger than any of them. You held your ground. But you were trembling. He did that. You were going to hurt him, she said again. For me. Why? Why do you care so much? I'm just your transaction, your prop. He was quiet for a long time, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. He looked at the city lights, but he was seeing something else, something long ago. Because no one cared when I was broken, he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. My father. He was a hard man, a violent man. He believed weakness was a sin. To be scared, to be hurt, that was weakness. So you learned to be stone. You learned to fix yourself. Or you learned to die. He looked at her, and his eyes were not the eyes of a mafia boss. They were the eyes of a boy who had been left alone. You shouldn't have to fix yourself alone, he said. The confession, so simple and so devastating, broke something inside her. He was not just her savior. He was not her master. He was a man who, like her, was covered in scars. She leaned in, and this time, the intimacy was not a question. It was an answer. She kissed him, not with the hesitant fear of the night before, but with a new, fierce understanding. He responded instantly, his mouth moving over hers, his hands coming up to cradle her face. The kiss was deep, searching, a conversation without words. Later, in the darkness of his room, she was the one who was brave. As they lay together, his shirt discarded, she reached out and traced the long, silvery scar on his back. He stiffened, but did not pull away. How? She whispered. My father, he said, his voice flat. An object lesson. I was 10. I showed fear. Hila's heart ached. She leaned over and pressed her lips to the raised, smooth skin, a kiss of acceptance, a kiss that said, I see you. His breath hitched. He rolled her onto her back, his body heavy and warm over hers, his gaze intense. He looked at her, his eyes tracing the faint, almost gone yellowing of a bruise on her collarbone, a place Troy had gripped her, a place she had hidden with high-necked shirts. He lowered his head and his mouth, warm and gentle, pressed against that exact spot. He was not kissing her skin. He was kissing her shame. He was kissing the memory of her pain, and in doing so, he was erasing it. Her body, which had been a source of fear and humiliation, became a source of pleasure. He moved slowly, his hands and mouth relearning her, honoring her, and she met him with a new, unbroken strength. She lay with her head on his chest, her hand splayed over his heart, its rhythm strong and steady beneath her palm. "I don't believe in fairy tales, Nico," she murmured into the quiet. "I don't believe in happily ever after." He was silent for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. "This is not a fairy tale. It is a promise." He tilted her chin up. "You are my wife, and I will give you a life where no man ever lays a hand on you without your explicit permission. Not even me." He was swearing a vow, more real and more binding than the one the judge had mumbled. The next day, the peace was shattered. The sun was high, and Isla was almost starting to believe in this new life. She was reading in the living room when Nico's private line rang. He answered. He listened. And the cold, efficient mask of the boss slammed back into place. He hung up and came to her. He stood before her, his face a mask. "What is it?" she asked. "My team has been tracking all inquiries into your old name for the last 24 hours. And Troy Beckett is actively searching for you. He used a backdoor system to ping your name against a national database. He's a cop, and he's smart. He's looking." The old, cold fear tried to grip her. "He found me." But before the panic could take root, Nico knelt in front of her, taking her hands. He looked her in the eyes, his own gaze a force of pure, unadulterated will. "Listen to me, Isla," he said, his voice a low, brutal promise. "He'll never touch you again. I am not just going to stop him. I am going to bury his career so deep. He'll be lucky to keep a parking ticket job. I will erase him. Do you understand me?" She looked into the eyes of her husband, the mafia boss, the broken man. She saw the promise. She saw the cage he was building, not for her, but for her monster. She nodded. "I understand." Nico Romano did not make promises he could not keep. His world was built on a foundation of absolutes, and in the 48 hours after his marriage, he moved his pieces across the board with a cold, terrifying precision. From the quiet, data-proof office in his penthouse, he made 2 calls. The first was to a man in a server farm in Eastern Europe, a digital ghost who, for a 7-figure sum, could rewrite history. "I want the name Officer Troy Beckett associated with every red flag in the system," Nico said, staring at the city below. "Internal affairs, missing evidence, anonymous tips. I want his digital life to become a nightmare." The second call was to a man in Chicago, a man who owed Nico a favor that was 10 years old and heavy with interest. "You work with a rat," Nico said, his voice flat. "A detective. He's on Beckett's payroll." "Boss, I don't know." "Find him," Nico interrupted, "or I will find you." He was building a digital cage. He arranged for Beckett's known bank accounts to be frozen, for his car to be flagged in a national database, for his service record to be buried under a mountain of sudden, anonymous complaints. He was, as promised, erasing him. It almost worked. The call came from Camila. Her voice, usually a perfect, monotone calm, was tight. "There is a problem. The Chicago leak. We found him, but it was too late." Nico's blood went cold. "Speak." "A corrupt detective in Beckett's precinct. He saw our man scrubbing the files. He got suspicious and did his own search. He found the request for the Elena Bianchi identity, linked it to our digital footprint, and sold it to Beckett an hour before we got to him." Nico closed his eyes. The sense of control, so absolute moments before, vanished. "Where is Beckett now?" he asked, his voice deadly. "He checked out a departmental vehicle 3 hours ago. Used a fake warrant to get flight clearance. He landed in Elmbrook 40 minutes ago. He's at the local police station right now, using his badge to requisition Ava Moore's file." Isla was in the guest room, sketching. Camilla, in her terrifying efficiency, had supplied her with art materials, thinking it might help. She was drawing the view from the window, her hand, for the first time, steady. She looked up when Nico entered. She knew instantly. The air around him had changed. It was no longer still. It was vibrating. "He's here," she said. It wasn't a question. Nico nodded. "He landed in Elmbrook. He's looking for Ava Moore." The pencil snapped in her fingers. The charcoal stick rolled across the expensive paper. leaving a black, jagged scar. "No," she whispered. The blood drained from her face. She wasn't seeing the penthouse. She was seeing the motel. She was seeing the ripped mattress. "No, no, no." She began to shake. Not the tremble of her hands she had felt at the dinner, but a deep, racking shudder that started in her core. Her breath hitched, shallow, then fast. "Isla!" Nico moved toward her. "He's here!" she gasped, her eyes wide, unseeing. "He's here, and I brought him." She pushed away from the table, backing up until she hit the wall, her hands flying to her head. "Oh God, Nico, I'm sorry. I brought him to you. He's gonna hurt you. I can't." She was hyperventilating, her vision narrowing to a pinprick. The walls were pressing in, the luxurious room becoming a cage, a coffin. She slid down the wall, her knees giving way, and curled into a tight ball, her gasps high and thin. It was a full-blown panic attack, the kind that had ruled her life in Chicago. Nico did not try to comfort her. He did not cook. He knelt in front of her, his presence a solid, unmoving object. He did not touch her. "Isla," he commanded, his voice a low, firm anchor in her storm. "Look at me." She shook her head, her face buried in her knees. I can't breathe." "Yes, you can. Look at me." Slowly, fighting her own terror, she lifted her head. Her face was pale, her eyes wild. "You did not bring him," Nico said, his gaze locked on hers. "You did not do this. He did. A corrupt, violent man did this. You are a survivor of his war. You are not the cause of it." He put one hand on her knee. His touch was firm, grounding. "Breathe with me, now." He took a long, slow breath, in through his nose, out through his mouth, again. She followed his lead, her ragged gasps slowly, painfully, hitching into a rhythm. The world stopped spinning, the walls receded. "You're safe," he said. "He's not here. He's in Elmbrook. He's looking for a ghost. But we are leaving." "Leaving?" she whispered, her body limp with the aftermath of the attack. "We are going somewhere he cannot find," Nico said. He stood and pulled her to her feet, his strength easy. "Luca is waiting downstairs. We are disappearing." The cabin was 3 hours north, buried deep in a national forest, on a private mountain that did not appear on any map. It was not a rustic log cabin. It was a fortress of dark wood, smoked glass and gray stone, built into the side of a cliff. It was beautiful, severe, and utterly isolated. A heavy, black SUV, identical to their own, was already parked in the drive. Luca, Nico's silent, watchful bodyguard, had driven them, and another of Nico's men now patrolled the dense, wooded perimeter. The air was different here. It was cold, clean, and smelled of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the wind, a low, mournful sigh through the massive trees. For 2 days, they lived in that quiet place. There was no television. The cell service was non-existent. There was only a satellite phone for Nico, which he kept in a bag, and a fireplace that crackled with a near-constant fire. The quiet, after the initial relief, became heavy. It left room for nothing but the thoughts they had been running from. Isla, stripped of her new identity as Mrs. Romano, and Nico, stripped of his business, were just two people, trapped in a glass box, waiting. On the second night, the tension broke. They were sitting on a thick, dark rug in front of the massive stone fireplace. A bottle of red wine sat open between them, barely touched. Isla was staring into the flames. "You know he's a cop," she said, her voice small, absorbed by the silence. "But you don't really know what that means." Nico turned from the fire, his expression unreadable. "Tell me." "It wasn't just the hitting," she said, the words pulling from her like teeth. "That was the easy part to understand, the part I could see. It was the other thing, the erasure." She looked at him, her eyes dark with the memory. "I was in art school, at the institute. I had a scholarship. I was good." A flicker of the old Isla, the one before Ava, the one before this, ghosted across her face. "He told me I was good. And then he told me the other students were a bad influence, that the men looked at me too much, that the city was dangerous." She picked at a thread on the rug. He didn't make me quit. He just made it impossible to stay. He'd show up at my classes, in uniform. He'd wait by my car. He told me he'd pay my tuition, so I could stop my part-time job. I quit. The money never came. By the time I realized I had no job and no way to pay, the semester was over. I'd lost my scholarship. Nico's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but his hand, resting on his knee, clenched into a fist. And then he had me, she continued, her voice flat. I was isolated. He took my phone. Just to check on my girl, he'd say. He'd park his cruiser outside the apartment on his days off, just sitting there. For hours, so I would know I couldn't leave. He was a cop. He was the law. Who was I supposed to call? The last terrible memory surfaced. I tried, she whispered. Once, I had pictures, bruises on my ribs. I went to his captain. I was so stupid, but I thought the system would work. The captain, he was this big, red-faced man. He smiled at me. He told me Troy was a good kid, just passionate. He told me I was hysterical. And then he picked up his phone and he called Troy, right in front of me. A tear, hot and angry, slid down her cheek. That night, Troy came home. He wasn't angry. He was calm. That's what scared me. He was so calm. He polished his gun at the kitchen table, and he told me he was going to fix the problem. He said I had been a bad, stupid girl, and he was going to correct me. He almost did. She couldn't say the rest. How he had pressed the cold steel of his off-duty piece to her temple. How he had laughed when she cried. Nico was no longer sitting. He was standing at the wall of glass, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. The silence of the forest screamed. My mother, he said, his voice a low, rough thing she had never heard. She was beautiful, and she was soft. My father called it weak. Isla looked up, her own pain momentarily forgotten. My father, he was a man of transactions, Nico said, his voice hollow. He didn't use his own money when he could have used someone else's. He didn't use his own time when he could use someone else's. And he used people. He turned, and in the firelight, his face was a mask of old, cold rage. He had associates, men he owed, or men who owed him. He used her, like a party favor, like a closing gift on a deal. He would send her to their hotels, and she would go. Nico, Isla breathed. I was 12, he said, ignoring her, his eyes fixed on a point in the dark woods. I heard a noise from her room, one of his friends, a man from the city. She was crying. I grabbed a fireplace poker from a hearth just like this one. He laughed, a short, brutal sound. A fireplace poker. Against a man like that, he just looked at me, and he broke my arm, snapped it, and my father watched. He told me, what is mine, I use, and she is mine. You will learn that. He finally looked at Isla, and his eyes were not the eyes of a mafia boss. They were the eyes of a 12-year-old boy, filled with a helpless, burning fury. I watched her drink herself into a grave. She died when I was 16. She just faded away. Because she was a thing to be used. I swore that day. I swore I would never be him. I would never, ever be a man who uses people. And I swore that any man I found who treated a person like a thing, I would destroy it. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his anger a palpable, physical force. He knelt before her, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders. He's not just your monster, Isla, he growled, his face inches from hers. He's mine. He's every man who watched. He's every man who took. He's my father, and I will burn him to the ground. She didn't feel fear. She felt a terrible, profound understanding. He wasn't her savior. He was her echo. You're not him, she whispered, her hand coming up to touch his face. You're not your father. Nico, you saved me. The touch, the words broke the iron wall of his control. His anger dissolved, leaving something raw and fierce in its place. He pulled her to him, his mouth crashing down on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not the tender kiss of their wedding night. It was a kiss of desperation, of shared rage, of two broken, scarred people finding a hold in a storm. It was a promise of violence, a promise of protection. He kissed her like he was laying claim, not to her body, but to her pain. He was kissing away the words of her ex, the hands of his father's men. He lifted her, his arms like steel, and carried her to the bedroom, never breaking the kiss. He laid her on the bed, his movements fierce, almost rough, but his eyes were full of a desperate, emotional need. He moved over her, and his hands, his mouth, began a new kind of erasure. He found the faint, yellowed shadow of a bruise on her collarbone, a memory of Troy's grip, his lips, warm and possessive, pressed against it. "This," he murmured against her skin, "this place. I am honoring it. This is the skin of a survivor." He kissed the pale, thin skin of her wrists, where she had been grabbed. He kissed her shoulder, where she had flinched. He was not claiming her. He was mapping her survival. He was worshipping her strength, and when she arched against him, her own hands no longer trembling, but strong, pulling him closer. It was not a surrender. It was a battle cry. It was hours later. Isla, for the first time in her adult life, was sleeping. Truly, deeply asleep, her body boneless, her face peaceful in the pale moonlight, her head on his chest. Nico was not sleeping. He was watching her, his heart an aching, heavy weight. He was watching her, and he was listening to the silence of the forest. The cabin was still. The fire had burned down to embers. On the dresser, the satellite phone, the one for war, buzzed. Not a ring, a silent, insistent vibration, carefully, so carefully. He slipped his arm from beneath her head, replacing it with a pillow. She murmured, but did not wake. He padded, naked, into the main room, his body tense. He picked up the phone. It was Luca. "Boss." The voice was tight, all adrenaline. "Perimeter's dark. The guard at the north checkpoint isn't answering. We found his radio, and, tracks. He was bribed. Someone came through the woods." Nico was already moving, pulling on his pants, his motions fluid. Economical. "Where?" "He's on the property. We're sweeping, but, boss, he's not alone. He came on foot, but he has backup. We spotted 2 cars, lights off, at the bottom of the main road. He's using the local cops. He's here." "How far?" Nico asked, his voice pure ice, as he grabbed his own weapon from a hidden drawer. "Less than a mile. On foot. Moving fast." Nico hung up. He stood for a long, terrible second, looking at the bedroom door. Isla was in there, sleeping the first peaceful sleep of her life, and he had to be the one to wake her. The transition from the warm, safe cocoon of sleep to the cold reality of survival was instant. There was no grogginess, no moment of confusion. 1 second, Isla was drifting in the aftermath of the most peaceful night of her life, and the next, a hand was over her mouth, firm, not bruising, and a voice was whispering in her ear. "Isla, wake up. Do not speak." Her eyes flew open. The room was pitch black, save for the faint silver slice of moonlight cutting through the gap in the heavy curtains. Nico was leaning over her, a shadow carved from the darkness. He was fully dressed, his tactical vest pulling tight across his chest, the glint of a weapon tucked into his holster. She nodded against his hand, and he released her. "He is here," Nico said. The words were not panicked. They were a report, a fact. "Put your shoes on. We are moving." Isla scrambled out of bed, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She shoved her feet into the boots she had left by the bed, her fingers fumbling with the laces. Outside. The silence of the forest had been replaced by a tension that vibrated through the floorboards. "Is he inside?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not yet, but he has breached the perimeter. He has 2 local officers with him. They're moving up the main drive." Nico grabbed a dark jacket from the chair and draped it over her shoulders. He didn't waste time with reassurances. He grabbed her hand, his grip like iron, and led her not to the front door, but to the back of the walk-in closet. He pushed aside a heavy rack of winter coats and pressed a panel in the cedar wall. It clicked and swung inward, revealing a narrow, concrete staircase plunging into darkness. "Go!" he commanded. As she descended, she heard the roar of an engine starting outside. It was the black SUV, tires screeching against gravel. "Luca is taking the vehicle," Nico said, closing the panel behind them and plunging them into the dim red glow of emergency lights. "He will lead them south, toward the highway. They will think we are running. But we aren't," she breathed, realizing they were going down, not out. "No, we are digging in." The staircase ended in a heavy steel door. Nico punched a code into the keypad, and it hissed open. They stepped into a bunker. It wasn't a damp, dirt-floored hole. It was a command center. Banks of monitors lined one wall, showing ghostly green feeds from cameras hidden throughout the forest. A ventilation system hummed with a low, steady drone. The air was recycled, cool, and smelled of ozone. Nico led her to a chair in the corner, away from the screens. "Stay here. Do not move. Do not make a sound." He turned to the monitors. On screen 3, Hila saw it. A sedan with a light bar on the roof was tearing up the driveway. Ignoring the fleeing SUV, they weren't falling for the decoy. "Smart," Nico muttered, his eyes narrowing. "He knows you won't leave me. He knows I won't run." He picked up a headset and spoke, his voice clipping with military precision. "Status," a voice crackled back. It was Marco, one of his lieutenants stationed at the main gate. "They bypassed the checkpoint. Boss, they're at the front door. It's Beckett. He's screaming. He's got his service weapon drawn. The 2 locals look nervous, but they're following his lead." "Hold your fire," Nico ordered. "Let him talk. I want everything on the record." Hila watched the screen, her hands gripping the arms of the chair until her knuckles turned white. On the monitor, she saw him. Troy Beckett. Even in the grainy night vision, he looked unhinged. He was pacing on the front porch of the cabin, kicking the door, his mouth moving in a shout she couldn't hear. Nico tapped a key, and audio flooded the bunker. "No, she's in there." Beckett's voice was distorted, ragged with fury. "I have a warrant. I have probable cause. Open this door or I will burn it down." Marco stepped into the frame on the screen, his hands raised calmly, blocking the door. "This is private property. You have no jurisdiction here." "I am the jurisdiction," Beckett roared, shoving his gun into Marco's chest. "You're harboring a fugitive, a dangerous fugitive. Hand her over and maybe I won't arrest you for obstruction. Maybe I won't expose this whole little operation you have going on here." Nico's face was stone. He reached for a burner phone on the console. He dialed a number from memory. "Judge Holloway," Nico said when the line connected. It was 3 a.m, but the voice on the other end answered instantly. "Nico, it's late." "It is time," Nico said. "The package we discussed. Release it, now." "Are you sure?" the judge asked. "Once I unseal those indictments, there is no going back. The Bureau will move immediately." "He's at my door. Holloway, he's waving a gun at my men. Release the files and call the extraction team. Tell them the target is hostile." Nico hung up. He watched the screen. Beckett was now pistol-whipping the doorframe, screaming Isla's name. Hila let out a small, choked sound. It was a sound of pure despair. Nico spun around. He crossed the small room in 2 strides and knelt before her. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, tears streaming down her face. "He's here," she sobbed, rocking back and forth. "He's here because of me. I brought this to you. I brought the violence to your house. I did this." "Stop," Nico said. "I'm poison," she whispered, looking at her hands as if they were stained. "Everywhere I go, he follows. I should have just let him kill me in Chicago. Then you would be safe. Then none of this." Nico grabbed her face between his hands, his grip firm enough to stop her rocking, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were fierce, blazing with an intensity that burned through her panic. "Listen to me," he growled, his voice low and rough. "He is not here because of you. He's here because he is a monster. He's here because for 10 years, a system designed to protect people looked the other way while he broke them." He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "He's here because no one stopped him before. No one stood in his way. No one told him no." Isla stared at him, her breath hitching. "Now I will," Nico promised. "I am the wall he does not get past. Do you understand? This ends tonight. Not because you are poisoned, but because you are worth a war." He kissed her forehead. A hard, desperate press of his lips, and then stood up. The audio in the room spiked, a crash, on the monitor. The front door of the cabin splintered inward. Beckett had kicked it in. He and the two nervous officers swarmed into the living room, the room where, hours ago, Nico had kissed Isla's scars. "They're in!" Marco shouted over the comms. "Boss, he's tearing the place apart. He's heading for the bedroom." "Let him search," Nico said calmly. "He won't find the tunnel, but he will find the side entrance to the lower level if he keeps looking. He's heading for the cellar door," Marco confirmed. Nico checked his weapon. He looked at Isla. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me. Do not open it unless you hear my voice. Understand?" "Nico, don't," she pleaded, standing up. "He'll kill you. He's crazy." "He's desperate," Nico corrected. "And desperate men make mistakes." He stepped out of the bunker, the heavy steel door sealing shut between them. Isla listened to the lock engagement. She was safe. She was trapped. She turned back to the monitors. She saw Nico on screen 4, moving through the underground hallway that led to the cellar stairs. He didn't have his gun drawn. He held it at his side, hidden by his leg. He walked with a terrifying calm. On the screen above, Beckett kicked open the cellar door. He descended the wooden stairs, his flashlight sweeping the darkness, the two officers trailing behind him, looking increasingly unsure of themselves. "Romano!" Beckett screamed. "I know you're down here. Come out!" Nico stepped into the light at the bottom of the stairs. He stood alone in the center of the storage room, surrounded by crates of wine and supplies. "Get out of my house," Nico said. His voice wasn't loud, but the microphones picked it up clearly. It was cold enough to freeze the air. Beckett spun around, aiming his weapon at Nico's chest. The two officers raised theirs as well, though their hands were shaking. "Where is she?" Beckett spat, sweat dripping down his face. He looked manic, his eyes bloodshot. "I know you have her. Ava Moore, or whatever fake name you bought her." "My wife's name is Isla Romano," Nico said, "and she is nowhere near you." "Liar!" Beckett advanced, the gun trembling in his grip. "You're a trafficker. Romano, that's the story. That's what goes in the report. You kidnapped a vulnerable woman, held her hostage, and when the police arrived, things got messy. I had to put you down." He grinned, a rictus of madness. "And then, when I found her, poor thing. She'll be so traumatized. She'll need me to take care of her again. She'll be so broken she won't be able to testify." Inside the bunker, Isla watched. She heard the words, "She'll need me to take care of her again." Something inside her snapped. It wasn't a break. It was a fusion. The fear, which had been a liquid thing running through her veins for 2 years, hardened. It turned into steel. She looked at the locked door. Nico was out there, facing a madman alone, to protect her, because she was worth a war. She couldn't let him fight it alone. Not this part. She turned to the console. There was a button marked Override. She didn't hesitate. She hit it. The steel door hissed open. Isla ran. She ran down the concrete hallway, her boots slapping against the floor. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have a plan. She just had the truth. "Drop the gun, Romano!" Beckett screamed in the storage room. "On your knees! I'm going to put a bullet in your head and save the taxpayer the cost of a trial." Nico didn't move. "You are already dead." "Beckett, you just don't know it yet. Shut up." Beckett cocked the hammer. "Troy!" the voice rang out, echoing off the concrete walls. Beckett froze. Nico's eyes widened imperceptibly, shifting past Beckett to the hallway. Isla stepped into the light. She stood 10 feet away, wearing Nico's jacket, her hair wild, her face pale. But she wasn't hiding. She wasn't flinching. She was standing tall. "Isla?" Beckett breathed, his face twisted into a sick expression of relief and ownership. "Baby, there you are. I told you I'd find you. I told you you couldn't run from me." "I'm not running," Isla said. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. She looked at the man who had haunted her nightmares, the man who had turned her into a ghost, and she saw him for what he was. He wasn't a god. He wasn't a monster. He was just a small, pathetic man with a gun. "Step away from him, Ayla," Beckett commanded, gesturing with the gun. "Come to me. He's a criminal. He's hurting you. I'm here to save you." "Save me?" Ayla laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "You tried to kill me. You destroyed my life. You made me wish I was dead every single day for 2 years." She took a step forward. The two officers behind Beckett glanced at each other, lowering their weapons slightly. This wasn't the narrative they had been sold. "He's brainwashed you," Beckett snarled, his eyes darting between her and Nico. "He's got inside your head." "No," Ayla said. She looked at Nico, and for a second, their eyes locked. She saw the terror in his gaze, terror for her, but she also saw the pride. "He gave me my life back. He gave me a voice." She turned back to Beckett. She squared her shoulders. "You already took my past, Troy," she said, the words ringing with finality. "I won't give you my future." Beckett's face crumpled. The mask of the concerned officer fell away, revealing the abuser beneath. The rage took over. "If I can't have you," he whispered, shifting his aim from Nico to Ayla, "no one can—" "No!" Nico roared. The moment stretched, slowed to a crawl. Beckett's finger tightened on the trigger. But Nico was already moving. He didn't lunge. He didn't dive. He raised his arm with the speed of a striking cobra. Crack! The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Ayla flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the pain. But it was Beckett who screamed. Nico's shot had been surgical. The bullet punched through Beckett's right shoulder, shattering the joint. The impact spun him around, and his service weapon clattered uselessly to the concrete floor. Before Beckett could even hit the ground, Nico was on him. He moved like a blur of violence. He kicked Beckett's legs out from under him, driving him face first into the floor. Nico's knee slammed into the center of Beckett's back, pinning him. The two other officers panicked, raising their guns again. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" The shout came from the top of the stairs. A dozen figures in tactical gear, FBI emblazoned on their vests, swarmed down into the cellar. They had been waiting in the woods, guided by the judge, waiting for the trap to spring. "Drop them, now!" The two local officers dropped their guns instantly, putting their hands in the air, realizing how badly they had miscalculated. Nico didn't look at the agents. He didn't look at the guns pointed at the room. He had Beckett pinned, his hand wrapped around the back of the man's neck, pressing his face into the dirt. "It's over," Nico whispered into Beckett's ear, his voice a lethal hiss. "You are done. You are erased. Get off him, Mr. Romano," the lead FBI agent barked, moving in. "We have it from here." Nico hesitated for a fraction of a second. The urge to end it, to finish the job his father would have finished, pulsed in his blood. But then he looked up. He saw Ayla. She was standing where he had left her, unhurt. She was breathing hard, staring at him. She wasn't looking at him with fear. She was looking at him like he was her heir. Nico released his grip. He stood up, stepping back, raising his hands slowly to show he was unarmed. The agents swarmed Beckett. They hauled him up, cuffing his good arm and his shattered one. He was sobbing now, a broken, whimpering mess, shouting about rights and conspiracies. "Troy Beckett," the lead agent read, "you are under arrest for racketeering, extortion, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. We have your files. We have your accounts. It's all over." As they dragged him past Ayla, Beckett looked at her. His eyes were empty. He was a ghost. Ayla didn't look away. She watched him go up the stairs. She watched him disappear. The room was filled with the chaotic noise of the arrest, radios chattering, orders being barked. But for Isla, the sound faded. She looked at Nico. He was standing by the wine crates, his shirt rumpled, his chest heaving. He looked at her, checking her for injuries, scanning her face. "Ayla?" he breathed. Her legs finally gave out. The adrenaline vanished, leaving her hollow and shaking. She crumbled toward the floor. Nico caught her. He was there before she fell, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her tight against him. He sank to the floor with her, cradling her in his lap amidst the dust and the chaos. She buried her face in his neck, and the sobs came. They weren't the terrified, silent tears of the motel. They were loud, ugly, wrenching sobs of release. The poison was leaving her system. The fear was bleeding out. "He's gone," Nico whispered into her hair, rocking her gently. "He's gone. He's gone." "I stood up," she choked out, clutching his shirt. "I stood up to him. I saw," Nico said, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw you. Illa, you were magnificent." He held her while the FBI secured the scene. He held her while the world started to turn again. He held her, and for the first time in her life, Isla didn't wonder when the other shoe would drop. There were no more shoes. There was only this. There was only him. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her past was finally, truly erased. The air at the estate was different. It didn't smell of the city's exhaust or the ocean's salt. It smelled of old money, of boxwood hedges warmed by the autumn sun and the loamy scent of 100 acres of ancient forest. It had been 3 weeks since the night in the cabin, 3 weeks since the world had cracked open and been rebuilt. Nico had brought her here, to a sprawling, fieldstone manor in the countryside, a place even his inner circle did not know existed. It was his true safe house, a place of peace, not a fortress of glass and steel. Here. Isla was not Ava, the ghost, or Elena, the fabrication. She was just Isla. She had a studio, a room with a wall of north-facing windows that flooded the space with clean, white light. She painted. She sketched. She had not touched a piece of charcoal, not truly, in over 2 years. At first, her hands had shaken, the muscle memory of her old life gone. But day by day, it returned. She wasn't drawing the view. She was drawing her hands, her feet, the way the light fell on a bowl of fruit. She was reclaiming herself, stroke by stroke. She was in the studio, her hands covered in gray dust. When the news broke, Nico had walked in, not with a phone, but with a tablet. He didn't say a word, just set it on her easel and pressed play. It was a national news broadcast. The face on the screen was Troy Beckett's, but it was a mugshot. "Officer Troy Beckett, a decorated member of the Chicago Police," the anchorwoman said, her voice crisp, "was dishonorably discharged and indicted today on a stunning list of federal charges, including racketeering, extortion, witness tampering, and conspiracy. The charges stem from a long-running internal affairs investigation, which was unsealed by a federal judge." The report went on. It detailed his abuses, his blackmail schemes, his ring of corrupt officers. But it was the next part that made Isla's breath catch. "The case was blown open by an anonymous source," the anchor continued, "but it has gained traction as several other women, all former partners of Beckett, have now stepped forward with their own testimonies of abuse and intimidation. A lawyer for one of the women stated they felt empowered by the system, finally taking action against a man they believed to be untouchable." Isla's hand flew to her mouth. Several other women. She hadn't just been running for herself. She had been the first domino. Her survival, her standing up in that dark cellar, had given them a voice. Nico, who'd been watching her, not the screen, spoke. "It's done. His badge is gone. His pension is gone. His name is gone. He'll be buried in a federal prison for so long he'll forget what the sun looks like." Isla looked at him, her husband, the man who had orchestrated this entire symphony of destruction. She didn't feel fear. She felt a profound, aching gratitude. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face into his shirt, inhaling his scent. "Thank you," she whispered. He held her, his hand stroking her hair. "I told you I would erase him. I keep my promises." A week later, Isla was in a car, but it wasn't a black sedan. It was a simple, gray sedan driven by Camilla. Nico had been reluctant. "You want to go where?" he had asked, his old world protective instincts flaring. "It's a women's protection network," Isla had explained, her voice calm, firm. "In the city. I'm not going as Isla Romano. I'm going as Elena. I'm just volunteering, sorting clothes, answering phones. I need this. Nico, I can't just..." Be the one who was saved. I need to be the one who helps. He had seen the steel in her spine, the same steel he had seen in the cellar, and he had nodded. He had called Camilla. The shelter was in a nondescript brick building, its address unpublished. Isla, as Elena Bianchi, spent the day in a basement room, sorting through donated clothes. It was mind-numbing work. It was the most important work she'd ever done. She listened to the other volunteers, to the hushed voices of the women who came seeking help. She heard her own story in their whispers, the isolation, the control, the fear. Camila, who was supposedly volunteering alongside her, but who Isla knew was her silent, armed shadow, watched her. At the end of the day, as they packed up, Camila spoke. You know he funds this place, right? Isla stopped, a child's tiny jacket in her hand. What? This one. And 2 others, through a dozen different shell corporations. Of course, Camilla said, her voice matter of fact. He started them 3 years ago, after he finalized his control of the family business. He called it cleaning his father's ledger. Isla stared at her. The man she thought she was coming to know, the mafia boss, the broken boy, the fierce protector, was also this. The man who had watched his mother be used and discarded was now secretly funding an army of protection for women with nowhere else to go. When they got back to the estate, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep, bruised purple. She found Nico on the stone terrace, staring out at the trees. She didn't say anything. She just walked up behind him and slipped her arms around him, laying her cheek against his back. He covered her hands with his. They stood like that for a long time, the silence a comfortable, shared blanket. He turned in her embrace. His face was uncharacteristically open, his dark eyes soft. Isla, Nico, I have something for you. He seemed nervous. Nico Romano, nervous. What is it? She asked, a small smile playing on her lips. He took a step back. He reached into his pocket. And then, he did the last thing in the world she ever expected him to do. He knelt. He went down on one knee, on the cold stone of the terrace, his gaze fixed on hers. He was not a boss. He was not a king. He was just a man, on his knees, holding out a small, velvet box. Isla, he said, his voice rough with an emotion she had never heard. The first time, I asked you to marry me. It was in a parking lot. It was a transaction. I offered you a cage to save you from another. Nico, you don't have to. I do, he said, his voice firm. Let me say this. I needed a prop. I needed a wife to make my world look clean. I was using you, in my own way. I was just like them. No, she said, her voice catching. You were never like them. I am asking you now, he said, his eyes holding hers. Not for protection, not for an alliance, not for my business. He opened the box. The ring was not a massive, vulgar diamond. It was an elegant, square-cut diamond, flanked by 2 deep blue sapphires. It was simple, timeless, and beautiful. I'm asking you because I am in love with you, he said. The words a raw, vulnerable confession. I'm asking you, Isla Merrick, Isla Romano, my Isla, will you marry me? For real this time? Not because you have to, but because you want to? Tears were streaming down her face, tears of joy, an emotion so new, so pure. She had almost forgotten it existed. Get up, she whispered, her voice thick. He looked confused, hurt. What? Get up, she said, laughing through her tears. She tugged on his hand, pulling him to his feet. When he was standing, she wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled his face down to hers. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, I will marry you. She kissed him, and it was not a kiss of fear or gratitude or passion. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated joy. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. The second wedding was nothing like the first. The first had been a candlelit contract on a sterile rooftop, a whisper in the dark. This was a shout in the sun. Nico had found a small, whitewashed coastal church, a tiny historic building that sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The same ocean that had brought her to Elmbrook? The ocean she had stared at, believing it was the end of the line. There were no capos. There were no armed guards at the door. The only guests were Camilla, who was crying silently in the front pew, and Luca, who stood at the back, his face, for the first time, in an expression that might have been a smile. Isla wore a simple, cream-colored linen dress that fell to her ankles. Her feet were bare. Her hair was down, the sea breeze from the open doors toying with it. Nico stood at the altar, not in a severe suit, but in a light linen shirt and dark trousers. He had never looked more handsome, or more at peace. The officiant was an old, local woman with a kind face. When it was time for the vows, Nico took her hands. He didn't have anything written down. He spoke from that place of shared, healed-over scars. "Isla," he said, his voice thick, "the night we met, I saw my own fear in your eyes, and the night we married, you were a ghost. You were trusting me with the only thing you had left. You trusted me with your fear." He squeezed her hands, his dark eyes shining. "Now," he whispered, a smile finally breaking through, "I want the rest. Trust me with your joy. Trust me with your anger. Trust me with your art. Trust me with your life, because it is, and always will be, the only life that matters to me." She was crying again. "I love you, Nico Romano, with everything I am, with everything I have left. I do." They kissed, and the kiss was salt and sun and promises, a new beginning built on the ashes of an old, burned-down life. Their honeymoon was not in Paris or Rome. It was a week, alone, in a rented beach house on a private, hidden stretch of sand, not far from the church. There were no phones. There was no security detail. There were just them. They walked on the beach, collecting shells. They cooked messy dinners in the small kitchen, laughing when they burned the garlic. They slept late and woke up tangled in the sheets. The sound of the ocean a constant, soothing presence. Their lovemaking was not the desperate, fierce healing of the cabin. It was slow. It was lazy. It was filled with laughter and long, quiet looks. It was the intimacy of two people who had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Isla lay in his arms, the late afternoon sun painting stripes across their naked bodies. Her head was on his chest, her fingers tracing the scar on his ribs. No longer a mark of pain, but a part of him she loved. For the first time in her adult life, she was completely at peace in her body. It was not a map of someone else's violence. It was not a source of shame. It was hers, and she was sharing it, joyfully, with the man she loved. She felt whole. On the last day, as they were packing, a courier arrived. It was a package from Camilla. Inside, there was a new, leather-bound folder. Isla opened it. It was a birth certificate. The name on it was not Ava Moore. It was not Elena Bianchi. It read, Isla Romano. Her eyes filled with tears. He had done it. He had moved heaven and earth. He had called in his digital ghosts and his federal judges, and he had made her real. Tucked in the back of the folder was one last thing. It was a small, faded photograph, the only thing she had managed to grab from her motel room before she fled. It was a picture of her and Troy from years ago at a police barbecue. She looked young, happy, and utterly blind. She'd carried it as a reminder of what she was running from. She didn't need it anymore. That night, she built a small fire on the beach, in the stone pit in front of the house. Nico sat with her, his arm a warm, solid weight around her shoulders. Isla looked at the photograph one last time. She saw the girl in the picture, and she didn't hate her. She felt sorry for her. She tossed it into the flames. They watched it curl, the faces blackening, the image of her past turning to smoke and ash, disappearing into the vast, dark sky. Isla turned, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for erasing my past." Nico pulled her closer, his lips finding her hair. He looked into the fire, and then at the woman in his arms, the woman who was his wife, his partner, his equal. "We'll write a better one together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would be absolutely thrilled if you would let us know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. We love hearing from you. Please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more, and share your thoughts in English.